Yeah.
So we are going to, we're going to start. It's about 2 minutes after. Thank you all for joining us, whether you are in the Northeast with storm damage and power outages, or you are choosing to be inside in the Southwest where it's beautiful instead of being outside. We're awfully glad that you joined us for today's conversation. Really quickly, many of you are returnees, some of you are not. So we want this to be as conversational as possible. So please go ahead and leave your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. You can also add some of your thoughts or responses into the chat, and we'll do our best to keep our eyes on both of those places and to incorporate your questions or your reactions as much as we can. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Matt Reichert. I'm the Director of Outreach and Engagement at GIA Publications, and we're just so happy that you have been with us for 4.5 weeks so far of the summer series marathon. We have a couple of more days coming up, additional programming. We hope you'll check those things out. But today we're focusing particularly on liturgical life in our parishes. Yes, right now in August, in the middle of a pandemic, but also beyond that, looking at where we've been in the last 5 months, where we've been in the months before that, to try to do some visioning and some looking forward to the months to come. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, as is our custom. Joe, if we could start with you, and then Wendy will hear from you. So Joe, go ahead and take it away.
Sure. Well, as you already may have heard, I'm in Los Angeles. My name is Joe Bazuris. I am the Director of Music at the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels here in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. I have been Director of the Cathedral for a little over 2 years. So I'm new to the cathedral scene, but getting used to it. I was born and raised here in Los Angeles. I did all of my schooling here too, because, well, let's face it, it's Los Angeles and it's really pretty. So whenever the thought has come to moving somewhere else, I look around and I'm like, no, I'll stay. But anyway, I'm really happy to be here this morning for me, because it's still 11 o'clock here on the West Coast. But I also serve as the chair of the Liturgical Commission for the Archdiocese. I'm also the chapter director of the Los Angeles chapter. So I've got my foot in a lot of different places. And again, I'm just really happy to be here this morning.
Great, thanks, Joe. Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy Slahavy. I'm in the worship office for the Archdiocese of Chicago. I'm the senior coordinator for liturgy and music. And the director of our office primarily takes care of liturgy. I primarily take care of music, but we all multitask. We have a third person who does mostly Hispanic resourcing, but again, all three of us work very closely as a team, which is great. Here in Chicago, we are into about the third wave of Renew My Church process. And so that's our pastoral plan for moving forward with vital parishes. And that's a process that's been accelerated as we have been moving through the COVID days, out of necessity, but also looking forward to the future with hope with revitalized parishes. So that's kind of what my office is primarily doing. We also work with the Cardinal's office on liturgies for the Cardinal and with the Cardinal, and we do a fair amount of programming in the Archdiocese.
Great, wonderful. Well, again, thank you both for being here and sharing your unique perspectives, both as individual practitioners, but also because of all the connections that you mentioned. I know both of you are very active with NPM and DMMD and other organizations, so this is really great to have your collective insight and observations. So here's where I'd like to begin the conversation. And again, for those of you who are joining us live, as you're thinking about these things, if you have a question, if you have something you want us to make sure that we address, please suggest that. But I want to get to talking about, opportunities, challenges, changes when it comes to liturgical life. And, the description for this, you presumed or posited, all of us, regardless of where we are in the country, are experiencing changes to our parish and liturgical lives. And that's true because of COVID and other things. Our changes might be different changes, or there might be changes in different directions. Some parts of the country are seeing pastoral planning that involves closing, merging, clustering parishes. Other parts are opening parishes, expanding mega-parishes, right? So change is constant. The types of change are different. So I want to start there by naming and acknowledging that. I also want to acknowledge that COVID has affected all of our parishes and all of our communities and the liturgical life in all of our communities. And it's done that in some distinctive ways. There are some things we're doing now, we're experiencing now because of COVID. COVID is also accelerating in some ways changes that already were underway because of the evolving parish life that we've been experiencing over the last several years. So I'm trying to myself wrap my mind around, we talk about 5 months of COVID and how that's upended life in the church. And that's true. And then also we look at all of the pastoral planning and changes that have been happening over years. And this change has not been new. It's just being flavored differently by COVID, perhaps, and other considerations added. So where I want to begin, yes, we'll get to liturgical life, is I want to broaden first to just parish life in general. And I am going to share my screen here, dear participants. And what I would like to do here is, I'm going to share my screen. What I have here is a new document that was released not long ago, just a couple of weeks ago, from the Vatican, from the Congregation and the Clergy. And some of you might have seen this. It is not a prerequisite for this conversation that any of you have read this or even know what this is. I hear collective sighs of relief. But this document, you can check it out. We'll send an email about this, our follow-up email, but you can find it for free on the Vatican website. And this is an instruction on, as you can see here, the pastoral conversion of the parish community in the service of the evangelizing mission of the church. And so this document, I want to do, spoiler alert, does not talk about liturgical life very much. It does talk about just parish life, how we operate our parishes, how we structure our parishes. There's a lot in here to chew on. There's a lot in here that needs interpretation. This is a pretty new document. But I want to begin here because if in June, the end of June, the Vatican has put out a document on the changing life in parishes, clearly we've been aware of changing life in parishes for a while, right? Vatican's a big ship to turn around. We know things take a long time. So the fact that this is happening now suggests we've been dealing with this for a while. And I want to begin just by looking at the introduction here really, really quickly, right? I want to look at the beginning way that this document structures what's happening, right? So if we look at, forgive me reading aloud here, right? But the ecclesiological reflection, the Second Vatican Council, together with the considerable social and cultural changes of recent decades, has resulted in various particular churches having to reorganize the manner in which the pastoral care parish communities are assigned, right? I'm going to skip a paragraph. Pope Francis, at the beginning of his Petrine ministry, recalling the importance of creativity, meaning thereby seeking new ways, that is, seeking how best to proclaim the gospel. In respect of this, the Holy Father concluded by saying, the Church and also the Code of Canon Law gives us immeasurable possibilities, much freedom to seek these things. That's an interesting turn of phrase. There will be others who I'm sure will come back to that, right? So as we look at this, I'm looking now at the last sentence here of this introduction. Parish communities will find herein a call to go out of themselves, offering instruments for reform, even structural, in a spirit of communion and collaboration, of encounter and closeness, of mercy and solicitude for the proclamation of the gospel. So that's a lot, right? So what I want to do to begin is to say, okay, let's get a sense of the landscape in your corners of the country, right? So maybe let's start with you, Wendy, in Chicago. Pre-COVID, right, before February, March-ish, what's the landscape of parish life been like? What are the things in, the Archdiocese or region? What's pastoral planning been like? What are the questions, concerns, things on the parish landscape in Chicago? What as you look at a document like this that calls us to say, we need to come up with creative new ways to look at parish life, what's the context where you are?
So for us, our big picture is, as I mentioned earlier, Renew My Church. That's our pastoral plan and pastoral approach for the foreseeable future. And it is definitely about structural change. We, like a lot of other parts of the country, are facing a shortage of priests, a shortage of finances, and parishes that are in neighborhoods that are no longer primarily Catholic, or buildings where the people are not. And so trying to match things up so that we have viable parish communities in every neighborhood. And so in many cases, what that means is we're putting parish resources together. And that's a really nice way of saying merging and closing. But the overarching picture here is not, financial realities are realities. And like I mentioned, we are accelerating Renew My Church because of those realities that are becoming just an avalanche rather than a snowball in terms of resources available because of COVID. But we really talk about moving forward in every parish with 3 mission imperatives. And they are making disciples, building communities, and inspiring witness. So, of course, on the parish level, there's a huge amount of confusion and grief as structures that have been around since their grandparents' time are changing and shifting, and it's painful. It's really painful. And so this isn't to deny that pain or to say that it's an easy process or that it always works flawlessly. But I'm really happy that here we've been working for the last 4 years on this idea of parish revitalization. And so in every neighborhood, we want a parish that can both serve its members and, more importantly, reach out to the community. Chicago, as you can imagine, and especially the Archdiocese of Chicago, is incredibly diverse. It encompasses the city of Chicago, the suburbs, the exurbs, and then as you go north, we are Lake County all the way up to the Wisconsin border. And so we've got some farmland up there, resort communities, really spread out parishes. So it's a real range, and so there's no one-size-fits-all approach. But if you can say there's a one-size-fits-all approach, it's that every parish needs to be able to support ministry, and it needs to be able to support outreach. So again, we're looking within and without the walls of the church and the borders of the parish. And so I think now, especially as we've moved online, and a lot of places have moved online pretty successfully because they've been forced to think creatively through the terms of Renew My Church. How can we read the signs of the times and best reach out to the people we need to serve? So like every part of the country, that it's successes and failures as we all are experimenting with this, but hopefully moving forward we'll even take on COVID not so much as a debilitating challenge, but as something that is just kind of pushing us even harder into a future of better vitality, greater witness. The thing I haven't touched on is the liturgical life of the parishes. I think so many times we know that the life of the parish is reflected in the liturgical life of the parish. I mean, that's obvious. But when people say, people aren't singing, we can't get volunteers, well, that's not really a liturgical problem, that's a parish issue. And so revitalizing parishes will hopefully have a good effect on revitalizing parish liturgy as well. We haven't quite gotten there yet here in Chicago, but that's something that's definitely on our horizon.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thanks. And Joe, what about where you are, and what do you see in Southern California in terms of your pastoral planning and what's been happening pre-COVID?
Yeah, so pre-COVID, I would say, the West Coast, in particular Southern California, is always bursting with life and people and a lot of vitality. We are not experiencing, as I know many other parts of the country are experiencing, a lot of actual parish closures or mergers and things of that. That's not really the case in Los Angeles or in any parts of our archdiocese. Our archdiocese is actually, it's very huge. It's actually the largest geographical archdiocese in the country. And it comes from the border of Orange County, if you know where Disneyland is. And it stretches all the way to just north of Santa Barbara. So it's a really huge amount. We're split into 5 pastoral regions, each with their own auxiliary bishop. So it's a lot of ground to cover. But we're not seeing really any parish closures or mergers. We do have some parishes that are, I guess we would call them twinned together, where there's one pastor that is just bouncing back and forth between 2 separate parish communities, but they're still distinct parish communities that have their own mass schedules, that have their own parish councils and finance councils and ministries and such. Part of that for us is because we're located where we are on the West Coast, we have 2 very big sources of immigration into the United States. And so we have immigration, of course, from Mexico, because we border Mexico. And so we have a gigantic Hispanic community and population throughout Los Angeles, as well as throughout Southern California. But because we're also on the West Coast, we also have a huge influx of people coming from Asia. And so we have huge Vietnamese communities, Korean communities, Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, major Filipino communities. And so with all these different sources of immigrants, many of whom are coming from Catholic backgrounds, it's kind of driven our Catholic parishes forward to kind of continue to be growing and expanding. Sometimes we've had to feel the need to open up actual centers for particular cultural communities. Like we have a couple of Vietnamese cultural centers for Vietnamese Catholics, Korean as well. But we see these kind of cultural parish communities definitely still popping up very frequently in Los Angeles. So our challenge really in our pastoral landscape is how do we bring everybody together when we're coming from such various backgrounds and various ways in how we express our Catholic identity. That's always one of our main challenges here, is how do we bring us all together as one Catholic family with all these things, and also a lot of how do we help those that are immigrating to our country to get established in the United States, to be welcomed into a community, to have the support and love of their brothers and sisters no matter where they're coming from. And so that's a big part of us. It's also, I mean, it's such, in terms of parish life, it's been a little while since I've been in a full-on parish life, because the cathedral here is very, it's right in the middle of downtown LA, so it's very urban, and so we have a very tiny parish community as such as it is. Most of the people that come to the cathedral are visitors, tourists, pilgrims, and such. And then before that, I was at the USC Catholic Center, so I was doing campus ministry. And so it was my life just before that where I was in an actual parish community. But at the time, and it really is that case, we find in our parish life, as I'm sure you do too, is that you're always combating with so many other things happening in the family life, and trying to stake your claim in the family life of your parish families in terms of getting people to be involved in parish activities, registering youth in sacramental formation. It's like, well, but we've got baseball this day, so can you do it this day? And and so we have, I don't know, depending on where you're at, you may not see as much of this, but we definitely have a lot of Catholics in our archdiocese that are church shoppers. And so we're close enough together, we're congested enough together that in any given area, you'll probably be able to find, at least 4 Catholic churches in probably about a 10-mile radius. And so therefore that opens up this opportunity of oh, well, I don't like the schedule of this church, so I'm going to go over to this church and see what their schedule's like. So the whole parish border dynamic definitely is not really something that people adhere to that much. I don't know if they do anywhere in the country, but they definitely don't here in Los Angeles. And so it's kind of strange that it's led in the last, I'd say, probably 5 to 10 years here in the landscape of our parish communities to for parish staffs to almost have to become marketing experts to find out the best way to market their parish so that parishioners either stay with them and don't go to the neighboring parish, or they attract new people that maybe weren't a part of the parish, but they want them to be. So it's an interesting dynamic. I don't know. And that's kind of the way of life here in the general parish sense in Los Angeles.
Yeah, no, I think, both of you touch on something important. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's this change and transformation that's happening, experienced very differently, but still there's that fundamental transformation that's happening. And of course, lots of people have spoken about this or written about it already, but there's this shift in the relationship between an individual or family and that fundamental parish unit. And what it represents. I live in a small town, and I grew up in the parish where my grandparents, were baptized, and to see generationally just their relationship to the parish, but also what the space the parish in their lives occupied, how different that is now for me and for my children within their own lifetime, my grandparents' lifetime. It's pretty significant. What from the perspective of people in the pews, what type of shift do you see, Wendy, in Chicago, for example? I mean, as people are doing pastoral planning and considering these types of relationships, how is this fundamental parish unit in relationship to people's lives in 2020 shifted and changed?
Yeah, I think, probably everywhere. I mean, we're a consumerist society, and so everybody's looking to get, you're always looking to get the best value, no matter what it is, and that includes church. I mean, it just extends for most people into, where am I going to get the best homily? Where am I going to get the best music? Where am I going to, get the best, sometimes easiest, religious formation for my children? And so one of the things we're really emphasizing here in Chicago is that, and it's something, it's kind of touchy when you start talking about evangelical language, but we talk about the personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So it's not necessarily, a personal relationship with a pastor that you like, but it's a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And that hopefully leads you into seeing the face of Christ in the community, and that hopefully leads you into a tighter bond with the community. And so through ups and downs, through good times and bad, you formed, almost, a sacramental bond with that community through the initial encounter with Jesus Christ. And so, we don't go around saying, have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? But that's an idea that we as Catholics really shy away from. But I think it's really central to getting away from a consumerist relationship with the parish. And so we put a lot of emphasis on that. Yeah.
What about Ellie Jo? I mean, I think your example of parish staffs having to sort of adopt best principles in marketing is I think that's right, as people are, again, combating this shift of the way people relate to a parish. From an individual perspective, what does it seem like people are looking for in this parish shopping? How are people sort of making their decisions?
I think they're looking for the best place that they feel that they find community. And that really is it. And if they're not finding it in their local parish, then they're just going to go elsewhere. I mean, you do have a little bit, like Wendy was saying about the sense of consumerism. I was going to say, it's like we have, the new cafeteria Catholic, which the old cafeteria Catholic, it was about what do you choose to believe in the Catholic Church. But to me, the new cafeteria Catholic is the one that picks and chooses what they want from the different parishes. And we do have that, like you were saying, when it's like, I know so many people that, well, we go to mass at this parish because we like the music there and we like, the liturgies are done there. But we do our religious formation over at this parish because this schedule works for us, or that we like the program over here. But we go to this Bible study over at this parish because we like the, so it's just depending on the different program offered. People just got to, I'll take a little bit from here, I'll take a little bit from there. But in general, I think what will draw someone to really be a part of a community is what kind of sense of community that they experience. And that really does come into the personal relationships, just like Wendy was saying. And that is a huge part of the rethinking and retooling that has been happening in parish staffs here, is how do we reimagine how we do things here in the parish so that it's not so programmatic. I think that's the thing, is in the 80s and then the 90s, it got into such a programmatic fashion where it's like, here is our First Communion program, here is our confirmation program, here is this program. And it became very programmatic. And it's like, you register, you attend, you graduate, and that's why it's like people felt like they graduated, and people were frustrated. It's like, oh, why do people feel like it's over, when they've been confirmed, like they've graduated from being a Catholic? It's like, well, because we designed it that way. We designed it to look and feel like a program that had a beginning and an ending, and not a journey, not a continual process of formation that embraces these moments of the sacraments, but continues on beyond those sacraments. We didn't put any effort into it. And so now we're trying to play catch up, and we're trying to retool and rethink all of our formational offerings in our parishes to say, okay, how do we make this a real, genuine journey with our parishioners, so that when they come and when they experience who we are, they experience an actual community that's going to be with them every step of the way in their lives, not just, here is your first communion teacher and you'll be with her for 2 years, and then maybe you'll see her at mass every now and then. And so I think that's the shift that really a lot of parishes are trying to make here in the Los Angeles area in the past couple of years, and even now. And that's the challenge now, is now that we've gone into the era of COVID, it's like, how do we keep that going? Yeah. Now that we've lost the physical connection of seeing everybody on a regular basis and being able to interact in that way. Now, how do we keep this going and not lose it, and continue to develop these relationships and to continue to journey with people, even though it's all going to have to be either virtually or over the phone or in some other way, but rather than in-person contact. That's what everyone is definitely scrambling to do right now, to figure out.
So I'm gonna share my screen one more time, because there's another section of this that I want to point out, and because it fits with exactly what the both of you are talking about, and that is so especially paragraphs 9 and 10 I think are interesting, and these are things we know, right? But as a living community of believers, the parish finds itself in a context whereby the territorial affiliation is increasingly less evident, where places of association are multiplied, and where interpersonal relationships risk being dissolved into a virtual world without any commitment or responsibility towards one's neighbor. I mean, that sort of sounds essentially like what we were talking about before, right? But then I think this is an interesting thing for us to consider, which is it's noteworthy how such cultural changes and the evolving territorial ties are fostering within the church, through the grace of the Holy Spirit, a new discernment around community, which consists in seeing reality with the eyes of God and with a view to unity and communion. The whole people of God must urgently embrace the Holy Spirit's invitation to begin the process of renewing the face of the church. And so the reason I point it out is not just to say, hey, we also talked about that and got there, but is to say, like, I think it's interesting. I think, what you both represent in terms of this changing relationship is really a what do we mean when we're talking about community, and the type of community we find within a parish unit. And to some extent, if community means an association with other people, well, we have lots of places where we find that, right? If there's a sense of being known or belonging, right? I think of the work of Bob McCarty around disaffiliation, especially among young Catholics, talking about community as the place where people know who you are and miss you when you're gone. If that's an understanding of community, then that's a whole different context for the way we structure and arrange things. And then if we also think about how the cultural context for what people experience outside of parish community, and how that does or does not match up with what we experience within the church. I think, Joe, your example of confirmation seeming as a graduation. So if we mimic the sending like we do in secular world, no surprise then that, we sent, but where's the return? But also if we think about our formation, if my faith formation, and again, I'm being very, I know this is forgiveness from people who are faith formation teachers on the call. If faith formation begins in 2nd grade and ends in 8th grade, right? But when my child's experience outside of church is formation begins when they're 2.5 and extends, way through, they're doing pre-college stuff in high school, et cetera, and beyond. There's a different structure that doesn't mirror. So again, we're not finding a parallel for our outside experience, et cetera, all this yada, yada, all that comes back to. How do we think about belonging and connection in a parish unit for people who are accustomed to seeking belonging and connection in different ways, digitally or not, outside of the church? So let's switch then and say, okay, what are the opportunities, challenges we have right now, COVID, liturgical life, et cetera? Because as you both talk about, parish shopping, how does that play into live stream liturgies, right? When it comes to, I like so-and-so's homilies better, or I like the music better, etc. Let's start just with that maybe, and then get into some of the opportunities for what we can do right now. What do you see anecdotally, or what do you predict, or what are you finding when it comes to live stream liturgies right now? Is it what I hear the naysayers say of, boy, we're doing live stream liturgies and that means we're never going to get people back because people love sitting on their couch and finding a church halfway around the world that works better for them? Or is there something fundamental that's missing? What's your read about the reality of the impact of live stream liturgies right now?
You know, I think the places that, it's just like if you put all your eggs in the basket of the Sunday liturgy, the liturgy is going to collapse under the weight of that. For those parishes that the only thing they're doing is a live stream liturgy, but they're not reaching out to their parishioners in any other way, then yeah, I think, you know, it's a pretty reasonable part of human nature to go look for the best experience you can. But those parishes that, you know, divided up their parish directories into a phone calling tree, and they call everybody once a week or twice a month or something. Hey, how you doing? Anything we can do for you? The places that have taken their Bible studies online or started an alpha group online, or you know, those choirs that maybe aren't singing or making, you know, fantastic virtual recordings, but are just getting together to say a prayer and say how you guys doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, places that are building community outside of the, you know, whatever your live stream experience is, 45 minutes, an hour. Then, I mean, you're a lot more likely to want to see your church and your people and your pastor, because you're going to have that all-week connection to them. And that's not to say that, you know, every aspect of everyone's life has to revolve around the church. You know, I've got lots of other communities I belong to that have nothing to do with the church, mostly virtual at this point, but that are life-giving and I feel part of, and it's great. But, you know, the sacramental life of the church, which we're hungering for so many of us, offers something completely different. And, you know, I think that bond that we can create with others who share that same sacramentality is a whole different bond, but it has to be reinforced and nurtured outside of the Sunday liturgy.
Does that seem to square with your experience, Joe?
I would say so. I would say, you know, there's kind of a mix of thoughts on the live stream liturgies. We've definitely, I think, just been overloaded with live stream liturgies in our archdiocese, because within a week, everyone became an expert on live streaming mass from their local parish, so that they could continue to have that parish connection. So, I mean, I definitely, some people are saying, well, why does everybody have to do it? You know, maybe just the cathedral should, and everyone should watch that. It's like, well, but then what? So then people aren't seeing their parish priest every week if they want to, and hearing his homily and still feeling somewhat in some way connected to their own parish community. So I was, whenever people kind of came with that approach, I was always ready to kind of push back with that, kind of like, I think it's important for them to still have that connection, and not just kind of funnel it all into one. But it also created then all these live stream liturgies where it's just like, you know, people said, well, I think I'm going to watch this one this week and this way, you know, this one another week. So I think that as hopefully when we get towards the end of this, not this webinar, but the end of this COVID period, that you'll definitely have people that will come, you know, those that were a devoted part of your community will come back, and because of the desire to be re-engaged with their community. Some of the fear and concern I've heard from others I've talked to surround people that maybe were on the fringe, and came into Mass and were okay about coming to Mass, but we're kind of on the fringe as it was, and now being in this time period of engaging through liturgy via live stream, and it being an okay thing because the bishops have given us dispensation, you know, from actually attending Mass physically, that once that ends, even though the bishops withdraw the dispensation, you're going to have this developed cultural mindset of like, we've been doing this for possibly almost a year. Now it's set up this mindset of like, well, what's the difference? Why can't I just watch and pray from home? Why do I have to be there in an actual church building. And so if we don't take the time, this is one of something that's come up in conversation here about what are we going to do in our archdiocese when we sense that we're getting closer to that time. What are we going to do to prepare the hearts and minds of the faithful that this temporary time that we had in COVID was temporary, and that there is a call to be gathered together in community, and that there is a difference to what has been and what we should be doing, so that there's evangelization happening, that there's a call, there's an actual call to worship together, and to bring people back into the church. Again, like I said, I don't think everyone's going to need it. It's so funny. I mean, you hear that the alarmists on both sides, some saying, oh my gosh, they're going to be pushing the church doors down, trying to get in once churches reopen, which I don't think is going to be the case. And then there's the other side that says churches are going to be absolutely empty. No one's going to come back, which I also don't think is going to be the case. I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. But what are we doing to really prepare our faithful community for whenever that transition is going to be? Or are we doing it now? We should really be constantly laying that groundwork of, this is what we're doing now, but we're constantly always going to be called to gather together physically in community, and not virtually. So that's just kind of some of the thoughts and landscape here of what's going on.
No, I think what both of you illustrate is that, there's this experience, I think, that we're starting to understand. And I'm just speaking now for myself, right? I've come to realize very much, again, something that I try to remind myself of and not forget, which is that, nothing's inevitable, right? Or few things are inevitable, right? And I think of so many times, I think about my parish has been here for, 180 years, it's inevitable, and it's not. Right? Or I think of the school my kids go to is inevitable, or my ability to go and eat at a restaurant is inevitable. And we're seeing in this time of COVID that, of course, that inevitability is not there. Things can change. And so, so many of my own efforts, my engagement with my parish, or the things I've helped my parish with, have always been based on the inevitability of, well, people will come. Well, people are members. Well, people feel like they're fine, And of course, that's challenged. So a bunch of comments have come in on the sidebar. And I know Rebecca writes, I think it's more that people feel safe about being home and are worried that the church isn't safe, but that they miss being together. We also, there's no music on live streams, so the Mass looks less like what they're used to. Even in parishes that aren't as connected, people miss being there and want to come back. And I think that's true. And I think what some of this gets to, and some of the other comments that have come in, is the connection of belonging, right? I might, I like your analogy, Joe, of the new cafeteria Catholic of, I send my kid to this school, but do faith formation here, et cetera. Where do I find belonging? If I call it my parish, or I really spend my time, where do I feel connected? So let's talk for a second right now on the liturgical front of our parish communities, where often right now that's what's visible, right? Or people have found their connection because they've been part of the choir, or they're in I'm going to include in that maybe some of the other prayer groups, or the people who are in the Rosary group, or the Liturgy of the Hours group, whatever, right? These connections that people have, opportunities where right now we can still foster a greater sense of belonging, or plug into that sense of belonging that maybe existed before. So we're not just taking it for granted or making it inevitable. So let's start there, and maybe things you've seen, things you've observed. And actually, I'm going to have, scrolling back through here to Penny. Penny writes in the comments, her choir has Zoom meetings to stay connected. They visit with each other and then sing. Maybe they're muted, and the only person you can hear singing is the person who's playing the piano, right? But it's made such a difference because they're maintaining that choir community. Is it about making music? Sure. But it's more so about my community. My people are able to gather together, that sense of belonging. It gives me that hope, but also that shot in the arm, right? Again, sort of free for all here, participants, if you want to add things in the chat. What are other things we can do, or we're seeing people do, to foster that sense of belonging, to continue that sense of belonging while we're in this virtual desert at the moment?
One of the things that I've heard a number of people say is even if they're on a gathering that's not, church-based, somehow issues of faith and matters of faith come out and are easier to talk about.
Mm.
A lot of people are finding that it's easier to, rather than having to go into a church basement and sit down and talk about God. I mean, you can do it from the comfort and the privacy of your own home. And so for people who are just beginning to think about, is there something beyond me? Who is this God? Who is this Jesus? It's a non-threatening environment. I'm in a prayer group, and one of the people in there has 2 adult children who don't go to church anymore, but and now have little kids themselves. But over the course of, all these family Zoom meetings that so many of us are doing, matters of faith started to come out. And she said, I've talked more with my kids about faith and God and what's important to us in the last 2 months than I have, in the last 20 years with them. It's somehow a non-threatening environment. Here in Chicago, we found online alpha groups have just exploded. And, we've got someone in our apartment who I think puts it really well. This isn't a numbers game. This isn't about getting, butts and pews. This is about building the kingdom of God here on earth for something larger than ourselves. So yeah, we want full vital parishes, but if we can lead people into a deeper relationship with Jesus Christ and with the community, we're really doing our job. I just got an email to flash through, sorry. Somebody mentioned something about it's a odd way we're presenting the church right now, in that if you go to a church live, you have to have a reservation or invitation, which is a huge roadblock for a lot of people who maybe would have slipped into the church just to see, and now it's so public, you feel like so exposed. At this precise moment in time, it's necessary for contact tracing, and I think it's the most responsible thing to do. But I think that's something that we're going to have to explain our way out of when that necessity is no longer there, because that is an impediment, a hugely important impediment, I think, right now, but not the way that we want to, say all are welcome to our churches, as long as you sign up online.
Yeah.
And give us all your contact information,
Yeah.
I had noticed that comment as well, Richard. I think you had posted that.
Yeah, it's a good one.
About, how do we say we're community and all are welcome, but you need a reservation to get in. And that is that is something that we're struggling with, because we're kind of bound by that, depending on what state we're in. In my state right now, we can't actually even have mass indoors. California, depending on what county you're in, and LA County is definitely one of those, because we have a really high rate of COVID infections. We're not allowed to celebrate mass inside the church building. It has to be outdoors if people are going to be in attendance. So we've been having masses with people out on the Cathedral Plaza. But before that, we were only allowed 100 people or 25% of our capacity, whatever was smaller. And if you've ever been to the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels, and you know how gigantic it is, it seats 3,200 people. And obviously 25% would still be way more than 100. So 100 was our mark. So we were only allowed to let 100 people into this gigantic cathedral for mass when we had the time, a short period when we were having mass inside. And it was very difficult to make the decisions on how we were going to orchestrate that, how people were going to get in. Would we do reservations? Would we do first come, first serve? And it's such a struggle. But I think that's when we need to really open ourselves up to what can we do as a parish community beyond mass to make people feel that they are still community, or give them the opportunity to still be in community. And so that's when our creative thinking caps really need to come on in terms of, are we able to do liturgy of the hours, virtually in some way, or even in maybe physically in present in some way at various different times, to allow people to still come and feel like they're part of a community, even if they can't get their mass reservation in? Or are we doing any other type of phone chains or other check-ins and things like that, other communal building that can still be done in the midst and in the process of all this, so that there's still some, there's still a real true driving attempt to maintain and to build a community and a sense of community. And that's where our creative minds need to come into play, because it's hard too. It's hard to sell people on this because Mass is so much a part of who we are. It is the source and summit of our faith. But as I reminded a friend of mine on Facebook who I'd known for a long time, and we got into a debate over this because she was pretty bent out of shape about the fact that she couldn't go to Mass inside the church. And I was trying to, just offer some creative suggestions. She eventually unfriended me, so you know how that ends. But it just shows how tied in people are to, Mass is it. And yes, Mass is the source and summit, but is Mass the totality of our faith? No. It's the center of it, but not the total of it. So when we can't quite get to it, the church has offered us a wide array of other things to help engage our communities in prayer, to help build our spiritual life. We just need to make use of them and believe in them. Yeah, that's just a little short anecdote.
Yeah, I think it's well worth remembering that there's so many people throughout the United States and throughout the world that have no opportunity to go to Mass, to participate in Mass on a regular basis outside of COVID times. We're pretty privileged here in the United States that most of us have, multiple opportunities in normal days to attend liturgy. So I think, we can learn from other parts of the world and other parts of the country what we do in the absence of a regular celebration of the Eucharist to keep people vital and connected. And I think that we can learn a lot from others in those areas.
And I think one of the things that I've seen, at least locally, in my neck of the woods, again, because we're up against, of course, what everyone is up against with fewer, less capacity. So fewer people are able to attend liturgy in person, especially the Mass in person, on top of the fact that we have already all area Catholic communities because of our limited priest resources. And then when you look at the number of our active priests who themselves are immunocompromised because of age or whatever, we don't have a lot of access. We can't, in other words, increase the number of Eucharistic liturgies that we offer at any given time. But what has happened is we've increased the offerings for morning prayer, or we've increased the opportunities for Sunday Vespers, or we've increased the opportunities for midday prayer in a way that at least, again, it's some sort of communal worship. And again, it's still limited. But there are some people who have felt safer coming to a smaller morning prayer opportunity than they have to a larger Eucharistic liturgy. Again, all of this within the confines of what's available. Also, people who then feel like, now I know how to do the liturgy, how to pray the liturgy of the hours when I'm at home, a different opportunity. And then I think of other things where it's not just a matter of providing the opportunity for people to come into my church space and to worship. I mean, obviously that's important. I don't want to say just only, but also how are there opportunities for people to have that sensory experience of communal worship in my church space? So for example, we talked about this way back when we did our Homecoming Sunday series with Michael Jonkis and Vicky Klima about the fact that liturgy that's live streamed, we're using 2 of our 5 senses, and we have a sensory rich liturgy. So me being able to be back in to pray with other people is a great sense of belonging and a sense of community, but also in terms of sensory deprivation for the way that I haven't been able to pray with other people or with all of my senses. I'm able to access that again. I think there's something there that's helpful. It reminds me when I go to one of these experiences, it helps remind me what I'm missing. Yes, I'm missing communal worship. Yes, I'm missing community. I'm also missing the totality of the way that I'm accustomed to pray and to worship with a whole community. We have also, as Richard McCarran's pointing out again, having the liturgy of the word also allows for a larger experience of people who can participate, not only praying, but also leading, being led by lay leaders, having the ability to have familiar faces lead. Maybe this is also an opportunity, and I do want to talk in a few of the minutes we have left, ways that not only can we overcome some of the challenges, but also use this time as an opportunity, perhaps. So I think sometimes I have members of my own parish who are not comfortable getting up and reading Sunday liturgy, or leading something, or doing the announcements, or some sort of much more public leadership opportunity, where this might be a way to have people ease into leadership of prayer or ease into facilitation of something. In my diocese, we are not singing at all. No cantors, no congregational singing, nothing. But we have instrumental music that's being used at liturgy. And so what we've had, and this has been a great opportunity, actually, we have high school students, we have parishioners in their 80s who might play the organ or might play the piano or might play the guitar, who are nervous about accompanying a singer or a congregation or a choir, who feel like they're comfortable playing that prelude or playing that communion piece or playing that piece at the end, who will come out and go out on a limb and play something, who never would have volunteered to accompany a choir or a congregation. But as I get more comfortable now, we have 3 or 4 times the number of accompanists who are currently actively playing instrumental music in our parish than we did before COVID. I'm not under any sort of assumption that they're all going to stay there and accompany soloists. But there's an opportunity, again, to engage. And I think again, any of that thinking outside the box is helpful. So thinking about new opportunities, to engage people who might not have been participatory before. Anything you're seeing, Joe, Wendy, happening, anything that might be replicated elsewhere, anything that might help us think outside the box?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of parishes are doing similar to what you're talking about, Matt. We're allowed to have a cantor. Well, not really a cantor because they're not leading anybody in song. So we've almost redefined them soloists for the time being. So we're allowed to have a singer and an accompanist. Maybe other instrumentalists are potentially allowed, as long as they're not woodwinds or brass. So very low on the saliva index, basically, is our rule of thumb. And so I think what we are seeing in some of our parishes, different people being engaged and being called upon to step forward and help. And a lot of that is due to, it's an unfortunate thing, but here's a good outcome. The unfortunate thing is that, of course, many of our colleagues, because of the financial stress that this has put on parishes, as many of our colleagues are being furloughed or laid off from their parishes in terms of leading music. If you're a music director, and I know, one colleague in particular that's happened to her, and her pastor is now turning to her volunteers that she had to lead the music because that's who they have right now, and so they're being asked to step up and come forward and do this. So there is an opportunity here for some of our volunteer members in our communities to hopefully get an opportunity to lead music in perhaps not, like you said, not such an intensive way where there's hundreds of people out there looking at them, but that it's more so it's on a camera, and yes, people are watching them, but you can't see them, and it's just it's a good way for them to get started, and hopefully that passion will carry on as things open up. Beyond that, I would also say, for myself, and I don't know any of you if this is your case. For me, I also love the opportunity that I'm not tied to a particular resource. So I've had a little more freedom in terms of music selection, of putting some different music out there, introducing new music that maybe I would have to spend a lot of energy and time, like teaching the choir and getting it ready and prepared and finding the right placement and all that kind of stuff for all those windows to align together. There's not so much to align together if it's just myself and one other musician, and just choosing the music. So I have been looking at that, and especially as we move into the fall, I'm going to start really strategically looking at what is the music that I maybe wanted to introduce to the cathedral worshiping community that I could do now and start using in some of our online liturgies, so that when we do come back together as a community in person, they'll have already heard it. They'll have already been, listening to it, and hopefully maybe even singing along at home for a while. Maybe it's a new mass setting, and I can introduce the whole mass setting if I want to, and not have to do it in pieces, and everyone will learn it over the course of the coming months. So at least be familiar with it, so that when it comes back, it's part of the parish language. So I think there's opportunities there too that we can look at in this time.
Yeah, I mean, I love all of those suggestions, and I what I like about underneath the surface of all that is this planful, strategic thought of what can we do now to address the current need, but also how are we laying the tracks or planting the seeds or whatever metaphor you want to use for whenever we get through this or past this or whatever that looks like. I mean, to be able to introduce that music now that you should be singing, to diversify. I mean, I think on Friday, our conversation in part of the summer series on Friday is going to be essentially how are we going to be different because of all these conversations we've had this summer, right? And if we need to, diversify the music that we're singing, both in terms of who wrote it or its language or its time period or whatever, this is a great way to begin planting those seeds, playing it instrumentally to then introduce it, right? This is a great time to begin thinking about if we do liturgy of the word on the weekend, because we can't have another Eucharistic liturgy, but we offer other opportunities for people to come together, and we can get other people involved in reading or leadership or playing the piano or whatever. More people involved in some of these ministries now. How is that helping set up an increased pool of lectors and ushers and cantors and accompanists and volunteers and choir members later on? All of these things, if I know who is in the community choir or our community theater troupe or the high school choir or whatever, and this is my chance to be able to reach out to them over the phone or whatever it might be to talk about, I miss singing too, and build a connection where later the invitation to come and join us might be planted. This, thinking about how to increase that sense of belonging now, plants the seeds for getting to the point of our ministry that we wanted to be anyway later. And I think that's an important thing for us to consider. Wendy, I jumped in there before you had a chance to respond.
I was just going to say, the other thing that I think this time gives us is a chance to spend a lot on formation, whether that be spiritual formation or, formation specifically for our ministry. I mean, because, in our part of the country, our choirs aren't going to be coming back for a while until probably the new year. So maybe now is the time that, you have a class on sight singing or ear training or something like that would be easy to do over Zoom. We have so many, in my experience, choir members that say, I don't read music. Well, you can read music. I mean, it's not impossible. And I can teach you how to do that. Now's the time, because we're not, spending all of our time getting ready for the coming weekend. Or a book club on Sing to the, why do we sing what we sing? So that when we come back to full conscious and active participation, we have a much better understanding of why we're doing this. And I think that can be done on a ministerial level. It can also perhaps be done on a parish level. If you are the director of liturgy, maybe you open up a Zoom webinar on your own, dealing with some aspect of mass to mission or, how and why we worship. To really help form people when we're in this funny time where active worship isn't as possible as it used to be.
Or if your community is like mine, where so much of the standing content of our bulletins has been wiped out, because what events are there for us to talk about? I mean, we've used those column inches to talk about things like looking for ways to pray at home or domestic church practices. Look at the readings for this Sunday. And also, by the way, here's how the lectionary is put together. This is why we hear the readings that we do. It's a great way to do a liturgical catechesis for the community in general, but also fill in the bulletin space that otherwise we wouldn't have had. There are ways to do it, because I mentioned that example in particular, and I apologize because I don't remember who mentioned it in the chat. We have to be careful too about about only doing all of these interesting things, important, necessary things that require an internet connection or require a certain time of day for access. Or, we need to make sure that we diversify the way that we're reaching out to people to make it as possible for as many people to reach us, whether they have an internet connection or an iPad or a laptop or not. So even thinking about how do we use a bulletin. One final thing, and then that I'll say, and then Joe or Wendy, if there's any final thoughts, takeaway, things that you're going to be thinking about in the months ahead, I'll ask you for that. We, in my parish bulletin, have developed sort of a missed connections kind of thing, where we realize that so many people have the, the people who sit in the pew ahead of you who always turn around to look at my kids because they're inevitably doing something they shouldn't, or the people we sit with at donut Sunday, or the usher we always see, who my kids are afraid of, but whatever, like the graph, and there are some of those interpersonal relationships that we miss very much from just being there, but you can set your watch to them, right? And so we have a spot in our bulletin, and when people can write a little message, here's an update of what's going on with us, because you don't get the chit chat, or we want to say hi to Bernice because we miss seeing her, and Alice misses waving or sharing her Cheerios or whatever. And it's a great way to have these little connections and continue those relationships. But it's in our bulletin, so people see it, but also people who pick up our bulletin at the grocery store or in the gathering space have a way to still stay connected. It's not just an email, or it's not just a Zoom. So any of these missed connection kind of things can be helpful. Final thoughts, because we're at the end of our time. Wendy, maybe if we could start with you, sort of as you think about the weeks, months ahead, like what's the thing for you that's at the forefront of your mind that you're going to keep coming back to or keep thinking about?
I think the most important thing to me is that idea of building community, knowing that there are certain huge limitations to virtual community building, but there's also huge advantages to virtual community building. I mean, greater outreach, people who might be afraid to come through the doors of your church, might be more willing to hop on a link if they're invited. So I think there's great opportunities for connection, but we really have to think creatively. And I think going beyond parish boundaries at this point is probably a pretty good thing. Reach out to, anybody in your circle who needs to be connected. This is not a time for any of us to be territorial about anything. I mean, it's taking, the whole world to be connected and beat this virus. So whatever we can do to stay connected as community, we can rebuild the practicalities when we have that opportunity. But if we don't have people invested in each other, there's no church. So
yeah. That's great. Thanks. Joe, how about you? What are you going to be thinking about in the weeks ahead?
I think we really need to look at this as an opportunity to redefine what it means to be Catholic, and how we live out our Catholic faith. I think for a long time, the totality of our Catholic faith has just been, Sunday and showing up at Mass, and then the rest of our life during the week is completely disconnected from church. This group probably very much an exception to that if you're on this webinar. But in general, in parish life, I think we know that there's a good chunk of our parish communities that's how they engaged, was just they showed up at Mass and then you didn't see them until next Sunday. And what COVID and the pandemic is really challenging us now, as I've found with some of my Facebook discussions, is really rediscovering and challenging ourselves to examine what does it mean to be Catholic. Is it just about showing up to Mass on Sunday, or is it also including everything that happens between that time, and who we are and what we do at home? How do we live out our faith at home? How are we living out our faith with our children, if you have them? And Matt, it's so funny you mentioned the whole with your kids and seeing things. I mean, that's definitely true of mine. My wife and I made a very conscious decision when we got married. She knew my line of work, and she said, wherever you work is where we will worship, because we worship as a family. And I said, okay. I'm like, that, granted, that could be very far from our home, but that was fine. And so wherever I work is where they come to Mass. And so when I started the cathedral, that's where they started coming to Sunday Mass. I have 4 kids, just FYI. They are 7, 4, 3, and just under a year. And God bless my wife, because she manages all of them somehow in the pew when they were coming to Mass. But that's a long way of getting to the fact that my choir, of course, got so accustomed to seeing them every Sunday that when I started doing Zoom calls with my choir, if my kids did not show up at some point on that Zoom call, all hell would be breaking loose for my choir members, because they needed to see the kids. They needed to have that contact. They needed to see how they were doing, get a wave, get a smile, and all of that. And so it really is about also maintaining those personal connections and those personal communities that we've been talking about in this last hour. But I think it really is, it's on us to drive that, to really drive that forward as leaders in ministry of how are we living out our Catholic faith? We're being challenged to live out our Catholic faith in a whole new way. And we need to inspire people on how to do that, because people are looking for inspiration. They're looking for ways to do it. And it's up to us to help lead the way.
Yeah, I think that resonates a lot with what I'm thinking about too, that what a lot of people are looking for is what the church has to offer if we get out of our own way in some ways. And I think also for me I do not want to whatsoever diminish the uniqueness and severity and problem of COVID in and of itself. I don't mean to suggest that whatsoever by any of this, but the issues that COVID is bringing to the fore or highlighting or amplifying or changing for us are issues we had before or we've been dealing with before. And the need to really thoughtfully rethink community, yes, but what about belonging? Relevance can be a difficult, word or concept for us to talk about because it suggests other things, but what difference does this make, and how does this contribute, and how does this meet people where they are, and what's the opportunity here? And then finally, I had one of, I'm sure, many typos in the description for this session. I wanted us to think about how can we be strategic and planful, and of course the typo changed to playful. So
I saw that.
really read the description.
Playful too.
How can we be playful and strategic? And I think some of that is the Holy Spirit's way of reminding me that, some of this is a matter of like that creativity, that Pope Francis calls us to. Let's try this and let's figure out what might happen. And is this the time when we just do things willy-nilly? No. But this is also the time to try stuff and see what sticks. And this is also the time for us to gamble a little on, well, let's do the outreach and let's call people and let's try that new thing. Let's introduce that song and let's tinker with the bulletin because we can, and let's tinker with things now because we can, because why not? And I think if we do it in the spirit of outreach and belonging, and maybe even, dare I say, playfulness, it might help challenge us and lead us to the place where we need to be. Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you so much, Joe, for helping us think through some of these things and scratching the surface. Thank you to those of you who joined us live. Thanks to those of you who are watching this recorded later. Please continue in the archive of this video, put in your comments, share your ideas, share what you're doing for the benefit of those who are watching this later. We'll use this as a little bit of a resource and idea swap. So thank you for being here for this summer series conversation. I hope you'll join us tomorrow. Tony Alonso, Peter Kolar, Juan Delgado talking about Caminemos con Jesus. And Friday, the big wrap up. How will we all be different after all this? I hope you'll join us for that. Thanks again. God bless. We'll see you all soon. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.